All right. Welcome to another edition of the Journey to Freedom podcast. And I'm Dr. B. I am your host. And as always, so excited. I think we're right over almost about 250 episodes now. And it has just been just the last 3 years have just been a whirlwind. Dr. John, just as you think of, I guess, why I started. And when I went to this seminar, it was a guy named David Horsager, trusted leadership. And I've told this story for many folks that have heard me before, with a guy named Scott Lundeen, who's here in the Denver metro area. And he took me to his college roommate and his friend. And this guy named David Horsager is like one of the foremost, I guess, leaders in understanding trust. And how do you lead with trust and how trust? And he's written several books and bestsellers. And I said, okay, I'll go. I definitely got to trust. We got trust issues all over life. And so I go to the seminar and there's 500 people in the room. David's been one of our podcast guests that has just been fun. And there's 500 people that are in this room. And I look around and there's about 30 people of color in the room, which is typical. It's in Minnesota, so I'm not expecting there to be, we're not in Texas. And I know doctors from San Antonio, where I think the largest group of African-American folks in the country is in the state of Texas. I don't know if you knew that, but
I did not know that, but that sounds reasonable.
And so I'm expecting it. And so, but the information was so good. And I'm like, well, how do I get this into our community? How do I take these things that other folks are learning and bring it back to our community? And so that became my quest of, okay, how to do it. And I used to say, as I was growing up and doing stuff, that it didn't matter. Like, I didn't need to see other men that looked like me doing things to make me feel that I could be, I could do it or be it or excel in it, whether I saw doctors or athletes or whatever it is. And then it kind of hit me when I was at that seminar, because I'm saying, okay, it doesn't matter to me. And I kept saying it doesn't matter to me. And yet I counted how many people were in the room. So that told me, like, there's two things that are going on here. One, I really do care and I'm counting, or I really don't care. Then why am I counting? I figured out that as I continue to go places and do something, it's just something that has been part of, I guess, my DNA. I'm 60 years old now, and just part of who I've been. And so I bring it back and I'm going, okay, so how do I just set up a coaching program? Do I set up how do I get people? I definitely want to take people, to understand and learn. And maybe the South is a place we could go. Just to kind of learn, because, I've seen the movies and I've seen all the things. But at the same time, there's these 8 pillars of trust. And I'm going, if there's folks that don't trust, it's Black men. So I started praying about it. And I was saying, God, I really want to help folks of color. And he says, I think you really need to help Black men. And I'm like, oh no, not just Black men. That's the hard group. That's the group that you don't tell me, God, that I just need to help Black men. And he's like, yeah, that's where I want you to start. And so that birthed the Journey to Freedom podcast. And I sat down in these rooms with folks that were helping me kind of put together what it would be. And I said, okay, in 2024, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to interview at least 100 Black successful men from our communities. And it doesn't, I'm not trying to find all the famous people. I'm not trying to find all the rappers and the singers and the songwriters and the athletes. I'm trying to find the everyday person who is making an impact and a difference in our society. And so my quest went out there. And so by the end of 2024, we actually had 105 episodes that were completed and done with men from all over the country. And it taught me, oh my gosh, there are some incredible men doing some incredible stuff. That rap that we get all the time. And I started asking stories and asking, well, how did somebody said, well, I had both parents. And the other person said, well, I only had a mom. The other said, I only had a dad. Or, we had these blended families. It was people from all walks of life. Well, I grew up in the hood, or I grew up in a nice area. And it didn't matter. Some of the things that our belief systems were exactly the same, no matter where we came from. And so it just got exciting. And so now, like I said, even now through 2025, we've done another 100 episodes, and we're just continue to move on. And so sometimes I not only do I have to remind myself that's why we're here, but I, for guests that I keep getting introduced to just amazing men that are doing some incredible stuff. And Dr. John Moreland, I just excited to have you on today. The stories that I've been told, you and I have not met yet, and so this is more exciting than ever to me, because the things that I've been told about you and your life and the way that you're helping the community and helping folks has just been phenomenal. I'm like, I can't wait to have this conversation. And I hope it's not our last conversation. I hope we're just getting started. And so, like all our guests, I would love for you to tell your story. Tell us about how you became and how you got to where you're at today, and take as long as you need to, because I think people love to hear more about who we are than what we do. And then we'll jump into what we do and how we impact lives. But, the who we are, as God just put us into this world for relationship. And I think part of a relationship is just knowing people. And so thank you for being on. Thank you for having me help do this experience with me, or you doing this experience with me. And at this point, please take the floor. Please tell us your story. I can't wait to hear it. And then we'll just chop it up after that.
Yeah. Well, Dr. B, thanks for letting me be here and inviting me on. I appreciate that. It's an honor. Anytime you're invited to talk a little bit about your journey and maybe what's going on. So, as you said, my name is John Moreland. I am born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. Fun fact, I'm born the 9th of 9 children, and I am born number 94 of 94 grandchildren. Yeah, man. My mom and her siblings, there was 15 of them. My last living aunt last living aunt or uncle on my mom's side, we just celebrated her 99th birthday about a week ago. And
Cool.
Yeah.
94 grandkids.
94. Now, that's my mom and my dad's side, but they both come from.
That's still a lot of I have 16 and going, wow, and I have 8 children. I'm like, how would there be 94? Are there some great grandchildren in there as well, or is it just
even more? I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So I love it.
Yeah. So God has been gracious, man. I born in San Antonio. I knew at a very early age that God had called me to 2 things. One, I knew He'd called me to preaching ministry when I was 5 years old. Man, I used to preach to the cows and the cars and the trees and Big Daddy's chicken coop and anybody and I knew that He had put it in my heart to be a police officer, believe it or not.
Okay.
And that's kind of a part of my journey that I talk about as the story unfolds, and how God has used that in my life and my journey with race, and kind of what brought me to doctoral work and so on and so forth. So anyway, grew up San Antonio, graduated high school. I enlisted in the Air Force at 17 years old. And so right out of high school, 15 days after graduation, I went to the Air Force. I spent 4 years on active duty. I got out and I became a police officer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then 9/11 happened and I got invited back for a year. So I came back to do another year on active duty, and did another few years in the reserves, got out for about a year and a half. And then I gained a commission as an officer in the Air Force. And so I spent the last 26, 27 years in the military. I've been active duty, I've been reserves, I've been guard, I've been active reserves, I've been active guard. And my journey is coming to an end. So I'm grateful. I tell people, next to faith and family, the Air Force is probably the best decision that I've ever made, and ties into a lot of your pillars. And so I'll talk about that and try to weave that in when we get there. Parallel to that, I've served in ministry since I was 14. So I started preaching when I was 14. I was ordained to the gospel ministry at 18. And I've served the last 30 plus years in ministry. I've had the privilege of pastoring 2 churches, both here in the Denver metro area. I pastored Lowry Community Christian Church for 5 years. I pastored Denver Christian Bible Church for 10 years. And a few years ago, I relinquished my pastorate and followed what I believe the Lord's called to be into academic ministry. So now I'm full time with Denver Seminary, where I get the privilege of serving as the Senior Director of Advancement here at the seminary. In fact, I'm in my office now. I just moved in not too long ago, so forgive me. I don't have anything up on the walls yet or anything like that. And I also get a chance to teach. My doctorate in leadership, so I tend to teach in the practical disciplines, leadership, preaching, that kind of stuff. Probably a significant part of my journey is with race and ethnicity. And so I've had some pretty forming experiences around this, and that has created a big burden in my heart as relates to the racial and ethnic divide that we see in our country, in our society, in the world, historically, so on and so forth. And I look at that, and my heart has been to mend that. My heart has been to be the bridge, if you will, between a lot of these, across a lot of these ethnic and racial divides and conversations. And I think God has given me a platform to do that. So I consult in this area. I own a small consulting company. And then also here at the seminary, I think, by God's grace, and I say this in all humility, maybe my voice has been helpful in helping us understand this space and bridge some of the cultural communication gaps between Black and white. And I say that in air quotes. I recognize race and ethnicity is broader than Black and white. So a few years ago, I had an encounter when I was a young police officer, and I had an encounter with a white police officer who assaulted one of my prisoners. I intervened to stop this assault. So the George Floyd murder was very triggering for me because I lived that. I literally lived that. And so I intervened to stop this assault. And so I broke this thin blue line, right? I broke the thin blue line. There was some racial and ethnic factors that were at play that caused me to be treated very differently than my white counterpart was treated. And so that began my journey with race and ethnicity. But I probably didn't give it its due attention, but it was the first time in my life where I was sure that I was experiencing racial and ethnic discrimination. By the way, what most people call race is really ethnicity. But for the sake of the popular conversation, I'll just use the term race, so I don't have to keep saying both of them. And so ultimately, this led to a huge divide. I was ostracized from my peers because I dared to stand up for what was right. And for me, I wasn't standing up for a minority. In my mind and heart, I was just standing up for what was right. You don't take prisoners who are in custody and beat them. And so it was a no-brainer for me. Got crossways with my department. I wound up having to sue my department. I did win the case. They settled the day before we were supposed to go to trial. But that effectively ended my law enforcement career. I could have gone on to be a cop or a federal agent somewhere else, but I just didn't have it in my heart after that. And so I did some other things. Got into sales. I spent, a few years in sales, pharmaceutical sales, medical device sales. Ultimately, my sales career is what brought me to Denver, still in ministry this whole time. And after getting to Denver, about a year after I got here, I started pastoring my first church. 5 years later, I planted Denver Christian Bible Church. I attended, did all my seminary training here. I did a Master of Divinity at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary, which is now Gateway Seminary. And I completed a doctoral ministry at Denver Seminary in leadership. And so that's a little bit about my academic journey, my ministry journey, my vocational journey. More important than all of that is my family. I'm married to Kenna. She's a graduate of North Carolina A&T. And so about this time, she would say Aggie Pride and also Liberty University. She's an educator by trade. So she spent the last 20 to 25 years as a teacher, as a teacher effectiveness coach, as an assistant principal, And now she works for a national consulting firm where they consult different districts around the country on pedagogy and administration. And she absolutely loves it. She was born to teach, but more importantly than that, she is just a fabulous mother. If I were a kid, I don't think you could ask for a better mother.
Well, that's so
And both of us now are grandparents to one granddaughter who's 4 years old. Her name is Zaya, and she's still perfect in our eyes. So that's a little bit about my journey, man.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, you will always be perfect in Zaya's eyes. So that is,
yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, she cannot be. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for kind of walking us through that. I do want to jump into some of the the race stuff, and like you said, it's mostly ethnicity. I went to and did a training, a diversity training, back when you could do diversity training, right? With the Inglewood Police Department, and oh my gosh, yes, I was enlightened in a big way. But before we do that, maybe we can talk a little bit about the identity. Like you said early on that at 5 years old, you knew you were called. You were called to the ministry. Did everything in your life just shape you towards that? Or how did you become tell me a little bit about your family and stuff that just helped you become this man that by 18 you're preaching, and or 14, I guess you said you started preaching. And tell me about your identity.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I could give you some story, that, where a journey, a discovery it didn't happen that way for me. I mean, obviously I have discovered deeper parts of my identity over time, but at 5 years old, probably before I could, read very well or do math very well, I had this in my heart. It's just it was there from birth. Legend in my family has it. Obviously, I don't know this to be true, but one of my older cousins tell this story that the day my mom brought me home from the hospital, that my grandmother walked into the room where I was, laid her hands on my head and said, this boy is going to be a preacher. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the legend in our family, And so for me, it's just always been there. It's just, and that's been honed over time, but it's just always been there.
Were your parents in the ministry, or were you?
No.
Wow.
No, I now have several cousins who are, but no. In fact, my mom and dad were Muslim until 2 or 3 years before I was born. I mean, I grew up with pictures of Elijah Muhammad and Muhammad Ali in my house. He and my dad were friends. Sitting at our dinner table. I remember pictures of my mom in full Muslim garb and regalia. And so now my mom was raised in the Christian church, but she followed my dad into the Nation of Islam, and they spent 25 years there or so. And somewhere on the journey, she found her way back to Christ before I was born, or 2 or 3 years before I was born.
Gotcha. So was your exposure because mom was taking you to church on a weekly basis, or was talk to me a little bit about the exposure that, grandma,
Yeah, unquestionably, man. My grandfather was a deacon in our local church. My grandmother was a church mother. And I tell people, man, we went to church, probably 4 or 5 days a week. The weekend church regimen for us started on Friday nights, so Friday night, Saturday night, all day Sunday. And that doesn't include, all the other events throughout the week. So yeah, I'm unapologetically, born and reared in the church, or what we call a pew baby. And yeah, that was a big part of shaping my identity over time, for sure.
Gotcha. So later on, you go to the Air Force, and now you're getting military experience, and you're trying to figure out, okay, were you trying to be like a chaplain in the military, or you just said, hey, I'm going to the Air Force, I'm going to learn what skills were you trying to learn there that you thought you might do later in life?
No, I want to be a cop.
Okay.
I had a mentor in high school, Doug Hallmark. He was a white man, still a mentor of mine, to this day. And Mr. Hallmark, I remember him saying, hey, you need to consider the the military. He was an old Army Ranger turned police officer turned teacher. And I encountered him. I was taking a law enforcement elective in high school. And he started talking to me about the benefits of the military. He said, you can't be a cop until you're 21, but you can be a cop in the military, at 17, 18. And so you really should consider the military, give you money for college, you'll get experience, so on and so forth. So literally the next week, my high school girlfriend and I went out and joined the Air Force, and both did careers. We didn't wind up together or married, but both were career airmen and officers. And so, no. Now, when I came to be an officer, I commissioned as a chaplain. I didn't stay in the chaplain corps. I was pastoring on the outside, and it was good. And by God's grace, I was successful in that realm. But I made my way actually back to security forces, and so I've served 3 times as a squadron commander. I'm now a deputy group commander, 1 combat tour. And so, no, I didn't go in to be a chaplain. I went in to be a cop.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool. When I think of I can tell that you're a person who really works hard on the things that make you better, and when we think about the lives of maybe just some of the other folks that are part of our community, how did you learn to, or how much time have you spent working on yourself? And then where did that come from? Where you were going to read, you were going to study, you were going to not do some of the things that the rest of us all do. And, spending all your time at a football game or playing basketball all the time, which those things are nothing wrong with those. I don't want you guys to think that I think you don't do that, but you also took time out to work on you. Yeah. Maybe kind of walk me through that journey with you that kept you always wanting to improve.
Yeah. If I'm honest, Dr. B, I think the most honest thing I can say, well, maybe let me give you a little bit of an analogy that'll help it make sense. My father-in-law was a world-class track athlete. He, through junior high school, broke and set new records in all of his events. He's almost 80 years old, and to this day, many of his records still stand from high school and college. And so if I didn't say this, he went into college ranked 16th in the world in his primary race. And so when you talk to him about that, hey, Dad, how'd you do it? Or what were you doing? His answer is, he says, John, we were just running scared. He said, man, we didn't know that we were setting records, or we didn't know that we were, making history or what have you. I mean, he was an Olympic contender. He says, we were just running scared. And I think that analogy describes my life in a lot of ways. Just running scared, meaning I was just trying to do the best that I could at whatever it was I was doing, trying to live with passion. Yeah, there are some sacrifices that come along with that. I'm not going to miss something that's going to make me better to watch a football game or a basketball game. I'm not wired like that. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But more importantly, man, I want to give credit to God and God's grace, because whatever people see in my life that they would call successful, I can almost assure you that it wasn't some intentional strategy that I had. I was just trying to do the next right thing that I felt like God was leading me to do, gave it my all, try to be the best that I could be. But man, I don't have any formula like I read 1,000 books, or, I get up and I read 2 hours a day, or, you hear these things, these formulas, and I always wonder, do you really? I don't know. Maybe they do. But I don't, my life is much more unsure. It's a lot of grace and just saying, Lord, where you lead, I'll follow. And I've tried to do that. So.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, but you did go through getting your master's and you got your doctorate, and maybe tell us a little bit about that journey. Was it something that you just thought always that you would do, or is it something that just as you learned more, you said, hey, I need to keep going? What were your thoughts there?
Yeah. Undergrad school was Doug Hallmark telling me, hey, you need to get a college degree. and then once I became a vocational pastor, right? So once this was no longer I'm just preaching, but now I'm a pastor. I'm leading people. Man, just by that time I had enough role models around me to realize, okay, I need to get some formal training. And so I relocated to Denver. It was the first time I lived in a place where there was accredited theological education. And this is before online education, so this is early 2000s. So there is no online program. University of Phoenix was doing it back then. They were about the only ones, but there was no widespread, online training. And so I get to Denver, and literally I start seminary almost at the same time that I started pastoring my first church.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm bringing, this, what I'm learning, into the pulpit and into leadership every week. And that was good. I grew a lot during that time. I learned a lot during that time. And it was in my master's program that I knew I wanted to teach. I've always had an affinity for teaching and for truth and for learning. And I knew if I was going to be, teach on a serious level or be invited to teach, that the doctorate was going to be important. But man, it took me 12 years to finish my doctorate, just between military obligations and family obligations. And, it took me 12 years. And so I'm grateful that that God gave me the strength to get through it. I wouldn't advise that, by the way.
Yeah, no, I'm similar with you, where it just took me, I didn't know when I started my doctorate, I was teaching at the university. I was teaching at Azusa Pacific University. Before that, I was at Cal State San Bernardino, UC Riverside, and then San Diego State. So I'm teaching it, but I'm teaching educational technology, right? I'm teaching teachers how to utilize technology in the classroom. And back then, the late 90s, it's way different. We were teaching like overhead projectors and VCRs, and then the internet came. And so they told me if I want to stay in this position, that I needed to get my doctorate. And I'm like, well, I don't want to get my doctorate right now. I wasn't ready. And so I started the process because they told me I had to. And then I started my own business. And then I could, so I went back and forth in doing it. So I know, if I had to go back, I should have just finished it. Although when I did finish, it was a lot easier because I had access to things that were the technology and the internet, and the libraries went away. Because when I started, there was a library in microfiche, and having to go up there and sit in these quiet rooms. And I'm an extrovert. What am I doing in a quiet room in a library?
Yeah.
So but it is a discipline to be able to do it for 12 years. While you not only the part that you left out of there, not only while you were starting your ministry and yours, you had a family, right? So. The family is they want stuff, right? They want dad to spend time with them. Let's talk about that just a little bit, because I love asking this question, because when we start talking about family, we know how important it is. At least I have yet to meet the person who doesn't think that all children should have their mother and their father as part of their life, and how important it is to have that, and for kids to grow up knowing both sides of the family. But what we don't talk about all the time is, what does it mean to be a dad, and how does that change our trajectory or change who we are as men when we're serious about that responsibility of being a father. And now all of a sudden you have this young life that is dependent on you for whatever you're going to train and teach it. And did that change who you were a little bit when you first became a father, and what does it mean to you to be able to be that dad?
Yeah, it absolutely did. But if I'm honest, it didn't change me enough. Not because I dismissed it, or not because I didn't care or wasn't present. I was all those things. There was just things that I didn't know, especially as a young father. I had my first kid when I was 18. Okay. And so, what I tell parents, dads now, that I pastor, I spent all of my working life, or I have spent all of my working life, trying to give my kids what I didn't have. Right? I wanted to make sure that they never had to worry about clothes or shoes, or, I grew up in a time where you had one pair of what they call Sunday shoes and one pair of school shoes, where you had, a pair of jeans or two and some little church outfit or two, and that was it. And so um, it would be unfair to say that we grew up poor. I used to think that, but now that I've seen true poverty, that would be disingenuous to say. I've never had a hungry day, and I've never had a dark day. My mother worked hard to make sure that we ate every day and that we had lights and heat. That was about it, right? I mean, we didn't have a ton more than that. And so I didn't want to burden my mom with things like new shoes, new clothes. So I just kind of, went with it, right? I didn't complain, but I grew up thinking, man, I never want my kids to have to worry about that. And so I've always worked 2-3 jobs to make sure I could give my kids the things that I didn't have. And now, as a little older, hopefully a little wiser, what I say to parents is, your focus should not be giving your kids what you didn't have. It should be teaching your kids what you didn't know.
Ooh.
And if I could do it over again, I would have spent a lot more time. And I did spend time with my kids. I was present for the games, recitals, etc. So please don't misunderstand me. But what I didn't do, again, because I just didn't know how to do, I didn't even know that I needed to do it, let alone know how, is I didn't spend this time talking, rehearsing life, pouring wisdom, kicking knowledge, anticipating scenarios. I didn't spend the time doing that. But, we have a gift in that I feel like God's given us another window with some of our young adult children to do that. And I'm trying to take full advantage of it. And I'm grateful that he's given us a second chance to do that. And my kids have done well and fine. And, we haven't had any major issues, no criminal issues and, that kind of thing. So I'm grateful for that. But I see some areas where I just could have poured more into them had I known that's what I did. I grew up thinking, and the way I learned was watching people. So I grew up thinking, if I expose my kids to the right thing, if I'm a good role model, they'll learn well. And it's like, that's only a piece of the equation. So
I love that, because a lot of times we just have the conversation, based on, stuff versus time, or material stuff versus time.
Yeah.
But for you to add on that piece of learning and understanding is so big. When I think about our young folks today, and I'm doing I'm in technology, right? So I'm going to do an AI seminar here on the 18th and talk about, I just wrote a book called The Relationship versus AI, and talking about how the AI generation is going to grow up.
Yeah.
And it's no longer about knowing stuff, right? It's about being able to learn. And so when we think about, well, at least to me, I mean, maybe I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But when I think about how are we teaching our kids if we're just buying them stuff, or we're just, that helicopter. I was reading something the other day where they were saying parents are now going to job interviews with their kids. And I'm like, I'm thinking as an employer and as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, like, if a parent shows up, I'm gonna like, are you counting on coming to work every day too?
Yeah.
If you are, then I get to hire both of you. I get 2 for 1. But that shit, like 25% of parents have considered not just going to sit in the lobby while they go in, but to actually go into the interview and advocate for their kids.
Wow, I hadn't heard that statistic. Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, so when we're thinking about, as young dads that are watching this and thinking, the mistake that you said, well, not obviously you were there for your kids and they're doing great, but if you could have, put more into them on that side of it, maybe what kind of things, I mean, you're talking to young families and that kind of stuff. How do we teach our kids how to learn?
Time. You got to spend time and real parental intimacy. Man, and I see this, I'm just going to say it, the white community, I think, understands this better than we do.
Yeah.
And there's some historical reasons for that. It's not by accident. And I'd love to talk about that, because you say that, I don't want people to hear what I'm not saying.
Yeah,
right?
please.
And so But I go to these, for example, I go to church conferences, and these young white brothers who are there, they've got their 3-year-old there in tow with them. They're teaching them about the conventions now. They're teaching them about the social issues that we're voting on as a convention now. They're teaching them how these processes work, meetings and decorum and order. And they're teaching them that. I go to the golf course and they've got their 3-year-old out there on the putting green, and they've got their own putter. And I'm like, man, I just didn't know that stuff, as a young father. I just didn't know that's how it worked, And so I think as Black parents, oftentimes we are accustomed to hustling on behalf of our kids. We don't want them in poverty. We want them educated. We want to give them a better life than we had, and unfortunately, sometimes the cost of that is the parental intimacy that we neglect. And so, man, my advice is, if brothers are listening, is to get your kids and spend time doing nothing, right? Cooking in the kitchen. If you're watching a football game, sit them down and explain it to them. If you're reading a book, give them a book to read while you're reading. If you're balancing your checkbook or balancing your budget, talk to them about money and how this works. If you're using a credit card, tell them what it is. Every single aspect of your life, we need to be introducing our kids to and teaching them about it. Every single aspect of it, And again, man, I just didn't know it. Now, let me tackle this other side, because I don't want people to hear what I'm not saying. There are historical reasons for this, and this is part of what I did my doctoral work in. And there is a reality to the fact that some communities have been advantaged and others have been disadvantaged, right? And what happens is those habits, those behaviors that we have learned, we pass on inadvertently, ignorantly, unknowingly, good and bad. Everyone does it. Everyone does it, right? And so when we think about our community and the historical disadvantages that we've had, we've got to talk about the whole picture, right? Yeah. And I say this to people when I do consulting work. You can't talk about the state of the Black family unless you're willing to also talk about historically how Black families were sold and pillaged and ravaged and rummaged and disenfranchised and separate. Like, you got to talk about the entire picture. And that's kind of one of the foundational pieces for my work and my thinking around this is history. We have such an ignorance of history. When I say we, I'm talking about everyone now. We, especially in the West, in North America, we have such an ignorance of history that people who've been advantaged don't know how they got there, and people who've been disadvantaged may not know how they got there, and almost no one is doing any thinking around how to bridge those gaps and make up some of those deficits. And so, I think I see it for what it is, and I'm just trying to do my part to rectify it.
Yeah, that is so, oh my gosh. As you're talking about that, and I'm thinking about how we unpack it, my dissertation was on experiences versus potential hiring Black administrators in schools, and that, how do we move up when you never get any experience because you become that professor or that teacher who can handle the other kids. So we need to keep you in the classroom there. So we're not going to put you as an administrator, but then I take these men to Alabama, and I feel like, and nothing, I guess I don't know, because I'm in the South and I'm in Birmingham, and I feel like I'm in 1970. And I feel like there's still some of the same, the segregation that continues going. I mean, I see parks and stuff where people weren't allowed to be in. And then, we go to Selma, and, I've seen the movie, but it's a whole nother thing to imagine what it was like to walk across that bridge, and then people literally, trying to kill you. And then you go to, in Montgomery, you go to the Bryan Stevenson Museum. Yeah. I don't know if you've been there yet, but I've been to the African American Museum in DC, which is amazing. And it's it's a celebration, and you got Beyonce's music, and all of the wonder of what it means to be Black in America. But then you go into the Montgomery, into the Bryan Stevenson, and the first screen is this ocean that just says, and it is about all the things that you're talking about that broke up the family, that took the family apart, that didn't believe. And you go, yeah, how do you do this without including all that and say, well, we're all just the same right now? Yeah. Because we're not. Yeah. The history and the things that are part of our DNA. And, my dad's telling me, my dad's now 86, and he's like, yeah, he was in Kansas City, Missouri. He's like, we didn't ever cross the line to go on the white side of town, like ever. It was, and then when we did, we were at colored drinking fountains. My mom talks about, the Klan showing up in California, my grandpa took care of the horses, and he's like, you guys are riding the horses that I take care of. I know who you are, come outside, and because your son talked to a white, that's part of all of our history. Yeah. So how do you reconcile that? I mean, you're a police officer, and I talked about, the police officers that I went to train, and, they're talking about, well, we're not going to go into, they're saying, well, I hate going to this Section 8, section of houses. It's just too many minorities in there. And I'm like, this is like 2022. What? Yeah. Yeah. And this is your belief system. So how do you reconcile that with what we hear now, especially with all the diversity stuff and all the things that we're hearing, taking books and stuff out of classrooms, and, give me your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I think this is good, man. I think my short answer to how do you reconcile it is, I don't know. I don't know that I've cracked that code yet, but I will tell you how I approach it.
Okay.
And that is, there are people who live on either extreme of this argument. I say, let's just say, for the sake of conversation, 10 to 15%, you're not going to change their mind one way or the other. That's not where I spend my time, right? Yeah. I want to spend my time with the 70 to 80% of people who I think want to get this right. I don't think the average person is racist, right? I don't think most people wake up every morning wishing for your demise because of the color of your skin. Yeah. I do think most of us are race ignorant.
Yes.
We're not racist, but we're race ignorant.
Yeah.
And so we lack understanding about the historical and cultural and sociological factors that have brought us to where we are. And so when you see some of the things that we're seeing now in, on the national stage, and some of the beliefs that are being perpetuated, and some of the ignorance and dangerous practices, quite frankly, it breaks my heart, man. It breaks my heart. The reinforcing of stereotypes. There are some people, I firmly believe, who would be content to rewind the tape to, the mid 50s or 60s. And that's scary to me. That's heartbreaking to me. It's infuriating to me at times. And I think in a lot of ways, and I hear sometimes well-intended, even Black folks, they'll say, well, we've been through worse. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
The difference to me is there was a time when we didn't know, right? We were still trying to get there, achieve, whatever. Well, now it's like we've experienced a certain amount of progress. And now there are some who are intent on watching our regression. Now, the good news is I really don't think that's the majority of people.
Yeah.
But those who I think fit that description wield a lot of power, and they have the ability to influence a lot of legislation and policy and practice. And that's bothersome to me, man. I think we're living in a time where everyone, because of some of the role models that we see, has been given permission to be their worst self. And I just refuse to give into that.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm trying to be the last, little bit. I've really said I'm going to be really intentional about not leaning into that. I'm going to be who I am in Christ. I'm going to try to love people well. I'm going to educate people. Now, don't get me wrong. Uh, One thing that I do now is I will challenge the stereotypes. I will challenge ignorance. I will challenge bad behavior. I will challenge disrespect, in a godly way. But I refuse to give in to hate. I refuse to give in to bigotry. I refuse to I refuse to give that back to anyone who, in their ignorance, chooses to give that to me. I just won't do it.
Yeah, that is so cool. When I think about, and as I'm traveling back, into the South, or I'm traveling to the North, or into Texas, or whatever, and I see the modern day church, and I see, as I go in, I'm a chaplain over at the Spalding Rehab Center, and so I get to do my 20 hours a month of just listening to people, and I love it to death. It's just, it's like it's my downtime. But then at the same time, I started hearing like how religion becomes more important than relationship, and all the things that have been done in the name of religion in the history of time, right?
Yeah.
Not based on faith. How, as a pastor, how as uh, a doctor that works in divinity and works at seminary, and now is starting to deal with this internet thing that has these algorithms that pull people in directions that could take them away from a relationship with God. I mean, just because of just the algorithms themselves. How are you dealing with that? What are some things that you're doing or teaching that is helping us with that relationship?
Relationship with one another or with God?
Both, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I think one of the first things people need to understand is most of the stuff they see on the internet is not real. It is propaganda.
Woo!
It is not real. And I know this for an absolute fact, right? I know that there are countries, our adversaries, who have plans to divide America from within using the internet, and that's all open source information. You can find that in a lot of different credible places. So we have to understand that there is intentionality behind this, for a lot of different reasons, most of which are not positive for us, as colleagues and friends and brothers who have to work together and live together and shop together, right? Like, there are people in this world, both in this country and outside of it, who have a vested interest in pitting us against one another. We have to understand that the internet is, by and large, fantasy land, by and large, And so people have to take it upon themselves to be responsible stewards of information, right?
Okay.
To find true information in places where they're interested, or around subjects that they're interested in. To not pass along things that aren't credible, to fact check for themselves, so on and so forth. Like, there's some responsibility that we bear in this. Otherwise, we're just like a bunch of sheep, being led to the slaughter, man, with one another. It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
And so that's part of it, And then, yeah, I think with every good thing, there's a shadow side to it, right? So the internet allows for the gospel to be spread further, faster. But the shadow side to that is it also allows for, clown behavior to be spread further, faster, man. And it's like, any simpleton with a microphone, we want to title a bishop or an apostle or a leader or a pastor. And that's one of the bad parts about the internet, is it makes the barrier of entry a lot lower into these places that really matter, and some of which have eternal consequence.
Yeah, and it just seems like we attack, or as a society, we attack, and it's probably the enemy and everything else that's part of what runs our planet. But it just seems the more that you find folks that are doing good, the more attacks and the faster they attack them, and the more. I mean, how do we guard ourselves, or you know, I know it's in learning and finding these credible, but it seems to be so hard. Somebody asked me the other day, like, watching the news, just, when they were trying to give me a newspaper. And I'm like, nobody reads the newspaper. I haven't read the newspaper in 15, 20 years. And I don't watch newscasts because of the things, but I still have to get credible information, right? I still have to, have this relate. Yeah. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Go find it. Don't let it find you.
Okay.
Right. And what I mean by that is you're doing research on a subject, or you need to know, some information for one reason or another. Go where you can find credible information, do your own research, so on and so forth. When I say don't let it find you, and all of us are guilty of this, right? It's this thing right here, just mind-numbing scrolling all day. We're not guarding our eyes. We're not guarding our ears. It's actually one of the things I'm working on. My family and I are, we have a Bible study every week, and this is one of the things that we're working on, is just not doing that, not just, mindlessly giving ourselves to this and being led around by every sound bite, every news clip, every reel. And so that would be my best advice there.
Man. Well, if we get a chance, I mean, we don't have time in this podcast to be able to do it, but I started one called the Fireside Chat, and I would love to just sit down with you and this, hey, what are 10 things that you guys are experiencing in your Bible study, or you're experiencing with your folks that you're talking to, that we could do to be very mindful? Because I just have the belief that, okay, I got this device, but I truly don't know how to use it, right? Where's the class that teaches me, or we think common sense, right? But we all know common sense isn't that common, right? Yeah. But where's okay, how do I make sure that when I pick this up at night, or I pick this up in the morning, that the things that I'm doing with it aren't the mindless scrolling and just putting stuff into, who I am in my brain, and this wonderful thing that God created for us, that I'm just allowing, that gate to be fully open, not even realizing what is taking over my thoughts and my mind and the things that I'm doing. So I would love for you to come back. We got a few minutes left, and I know there's, oh man, I could just talk. I know I could talk to you forever. I'd love to just sit down at a restaurant and have conversations with you over and over. But what didn't we get to talk about today that you wanted to make sure that folks that are watching, or folks that you'll send this to, or over time as they watch this podcast, that you want to make sure that they know about?
Yeah. You mentioned one thing, you said you were doing a tour of the South this year. Denver Seminary, we have a program called Theology, Justice, and Advocacy.
Okay.
And so Dr. Patty Pell leads that program. I get the privilege to teach in it every year. And we actually teach a course on the civil rights movement in the church, or the role of the church in the civil rights movement. Okay. And so we do that tour every summer. We do Atlanta, Birmingham, Montgomery. We did the Bryan Stevenson Museum this past year. We do all the, 16th Street Church in Birmingham. I mean, and then of course all the historical places in Atlanta. And so if anyone's interested in that or hearing more about that, denverseminary.edu. We have some wonderful programs, and you don't have to be a pastor. That's some information out there that isn't correct. The notion that you have to be a pastor to go to seminary or to learn theologically just isn't true. And so I tell people, if you know that you want to learn more about God or lead at a higher level, understand your Bible a little better, we have many certificate programs that you could benefit from. Probably at the top of that list is the lay ministry certificate program. You learn a little bit about how to interpret the Bible, and you learn basic theology, and you learn a little bit about reading and writing at the graduate level, and leadership and preaching and spiritual formation, some basic counseling. And it's only 2 semesters, And so if people want to know more about that, I'd love for folks to be able to email me. And my email address is real simple. It's my first name dot last name. So John.Moreland at denverseminary.edu, john.moreland@denverseminary.edu. And so that's probably, one big thing that I would say that maybe, maybe worth passing on.
Yeah, I had no idea. I thought, I'm thinking seminaries. You go to seminary because you need to get ordained and be in this, but that you guys have all those certificates and things that are available.
Yeah.
As we were just talking, what are some things that people could do? And that's one of them. And I would encourage you to go on there and look up, what it is that they have and what can you dig into and do. And maybe at some point we can team up and, do our tour together or something, or,
Yeah.
part of it or meet you there or part of it, because there's so much. What I just got to know this because you've told me you've been there. What was probably your biggest takeaway from the Bryan Stevenson Museum when you went through it?
The numbers of people that were trafficked in the transatlantic African slave trade. The numbers of people that were trafficked and the numbers of lives lost were probably my biggest takeaways. I don't think people, in fact, I'm confident that people don't realize how brutal slavery was and how far-reaching and long-lasting the effects have been, not only in the Black community, but in humanity. Dr. Joy DeGruy does a good work on this, has done good thinking around this in a work called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she doesn't just talk about how slavery has affected Black people, but all of us. Mm-hmm. And so those were probably some of my big takeaways.
Yeah, that's mine. The segregation signs were a big thing for me. My wife went through it with me. My wife's Hispanic, and where it said, no Mexicans, no Puerto Ricans, no, Negroes, allowed in this, and how that was mainstream. That was life for however long. I guess where I sometimes get confused in not, when we think about post-slavery and I think about the 1900s and thinking how well we were doing before segregation, before, where it was, or I'm saying desegregation, not segregation. So when we were segregated and we were in our own schools and we were teaching our own selves and we were, testing super high, and then we desegregate and then we have to drive on buses and stuff to other schools to be put in back of classrooms and not to be giving, the same education we would have got when we were segregated. And then, to pull people out of homes and, make sure that the dads don't get to be part of the household if they're going to get any money when there's no jobs. And, so all that came after as a result of the things that were before. So, but that's another conversation that we will get to. And I just so appreciate you being on with me today and taking the time to share not only your experiences, but some knowledge of things that we have the ability to be able to do and go out and begin. And like I said, I would go to Denver Seminary, if you're watching this right now, and find a class that you could take and something that could move you forward. Do you have any one last thought that you would love to share before we end today?
Man, I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe encouraging people to keep their eyes fixed on Christ in this season. Mm-hmm. Don't look to politics or legislation or anything along those lines. But fix and focus on Jesus during this time. So
yeah, you think of all the division that I think is just even so much greater than it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. That even growing up with some of the racial issues that have happened here in Colorado that I had to deal with as a kid. To me, I think about my children and how they're growing up in this such divisive world where information doesn't really flow to everybody. At least I think when I was growing up, when you could watch Cronkite or whatever, I think everybody was kind of getting the same news, because there's only a few channels. But now everybody's not getting the same news. Everybody's not getting the same information. They're not
intentionally so.
Oh, absolutely. It's so intentional. And so it's a matter of, prayer. And then it's also like you were saying, is look for it instead of it looking for you.
Yeah.
And so, Dr. Moreland, thank you. It has been a pleasure. If this has been your first episode that you've ever watched, go ahead and hit the subscribe and notifications. We have so many more of just incredible folks that are giving us knowledge of how to make it through this life that we're living in. I want you to remember that you are God's greatest gift, and he loves you if you allow him to. And I can't wait to see you at the next one. Again, thank you, Doc. We will talk with you soon. This isn't the last time, I promise. No matter, even have to go to his house and stand in front of him and say, we're going to talk.
I look forward to it, man.
All right. So you guys have an amazing, awesome, just incredible day today.